What is up, Kryptonians, and welcome to my spoiler-filled video for Dune, or Dune Part 1, if you want to call it that. I'm sure you guys are wondering, where has this video been and why has it taken so long for me to put this out? For starters, I was actually really busy this weekend, not just with Dune, but with other stuff. But as it relates to Dune, I saw it about 5 times this weekend. Like, I officially got lost in the seat 3 times in IMAX and then twice in Dolby. Really a surprise for anybody that's followed me on social media. You know how obsessed I have been with Dune. Not just obsessed with Dune and Denis Villeneuve and all of the other people that are in the movie, but obsessed with the lore and the world of Dune because I have read the books. I haven't read all the books. I've read a good portion of the Frank Herbert saga of Dune, so I know a lot about that lore and I know a lot about what's coming. So I was obsessed with that, and that turned into obsession with Dune. Like, you guys get what I'm saying. I'm gonna probably try to give a vague overview and general thoughts of Dune before I get into spoilers, but we'll do general thoughts on Dune first. And what are my general thoughts on Dune? Well, yes. Oh. I had so many emotions running through me while I was watching it and after I watched it. Like, I legitimately went to my car and I cried for like 5 minutes, and I didn't even realize I was crying. Like, I was trying to think about it and process it, and all of a sudden my body just started giving away its moisture. If a Fremen was sitting there in the car with me, he or she would have slapped the fuck out of me and asked me why I'm giving up my body's moisture so willingly. But you know, they didn't get to watch Dune like I did, so they don't know what I'm feeling. Anybody that knows me knows I'm a huge Lord of the Rings fan, and not just a fan of the movies, but I was a fan of the books. And I remember as a 9-year-old going to the movies with my dad and watching Lord of the Rings for the first time. I've said this before, but watching Lord of the Rings in theaters, seeing that kind of cinema and seeing all of those pages being brought to life in front of my eyes, it changed everything about how I view movies. While I can't say that this movie changed cinema or anything for me, what I can say is that it gave me that feeling that I had as a 9-year-old when I was witnessing something incredible for the first time, something that I never thought that I would see. So many things to love about Denis and what he has done with Dune. There's so much to love about the cast. There's so much to love about the faithfulness of what he has accomplished here. It's a gargantuan, seismic sci-fi classic. This is hands down one of the greatest films of this decade. It's one of the greatest sci-fi films ever made, and if we're just talking adaptations, it's one of the greatest one of those too. The level of scale and scope that he was able to bring to this film, it's unmatched. And the way that he was able to so faithfully and beautifully translate everything that I saw in my mind's eye from those pages and put it on screen in a way that not only keeps in mind aesthetically and visually with the book, but also makes it accessible for people that have not read the book. That's not an easy task, especially with this lore, because Dune is very complex. It's very dense. There's a lot going on in the story of Dune in terms of religion and politics and philosophy and thematic material to sift through. Hans Zimmer absolutely destroyed this score. Like, in terms of music for the rest of the year, there's no point. It's easily like the greatest score I've heard this year. It's one of the greatest scores that Hans Zimmer has ever created. It's huge, it's larger than life, it's powerful, it's haunting, it's dark, it's got so many different variations to it. There's so much about the score that is emotional. There are so many different sounds and noises that Hans throws in there, from drums to whistles to animal sounds. It's on another level, and it elevates everything in this movie to another level, and I can't thank Hans Zimmer enough for what he's done here, and I'm so happy that we're gonna be getting him back for part 2, and more on that later. When it comes to the cast, it's nearly perfect. Like, there's not a single casting choice that I had a problem with going into the movie, and now that I've seen the movie, I can say that they almost perfectly capture the characters that they're supposed to be embodying for a movie like this. Overall, Dune was such an experience that touched my heart and my head, and it made me touch myself in the theater, to be honest with you. It's okay, I didn't touch myself to the point that I was at risk of getting thrown out of the theater or anything, but all I'm saying is, yeah, there was some sexual stuff going on in that theater the first time I saw it, I'm not gonna lie. Of cinematography, which is eggs on a tit, omelet titties. It's the most gorgeous movie that I've seen, not just all year, but maybe the most gorgeous movie I've seen in my life. Like, I really have to think about it. Everything that this movie had to do and all of the things it had to juggle, it's a near perfect 10 out of 10 for me, and you guys know what rating I would give it. I don't have to put that rating here. Those are my general thoughts on Dune. Now we can kind of get into the spoiler territory. I'm gonna try to avoid spoilers for part 2 of the Dune book or for Dune Messiah or anything down the road. I might accidentally let something slip, but I'm gonna try to avoid that. Most of my spoilers are gonna have to do with this movie specifically. Anything as far as flaws with this movie, all I can really say is that obviously there is some slow burn and some slow pacing that builds character and builds the narrative or whatever, but some people, they may want something a little bit more fast paced, to which I totally understand. But the biggest criticism you could say about this movie is that it's only part 1. It really does feel like half of the story, and it ends at a point where people will be like, wait, what the hell? Where's the rest of it? We are getting a part 2, so those people can rest assured you will see the rest of the story in all of its glory sometime in 2023. Actually, I think October of 2023. First, I want to start with some positive, interesting imagery that I feel like is a perfect reflection of some of the themes from the book, or is taken directly from the book and translated beautifully. For starters, when Paul is leaving Caladan, this is like the first time that he's leaving his planet and going to another planet. There's a brief shot where he puts his hand in the water and he like touches the water underneath the surface. The first time he goes to the desert during the spice harvest scene, he gets down and he grabs a fistful of sand and holds it up. And I thought this was a perfect demonstration of the different visual aspects, not just of Caladan to Arrakis, but also of how the different resources on each world are weighed. Caladan has an abundance of water. There's like so much water. It's like one of their biggest resources. But in the desert, spice is the biggest resource. And I thought it was just very telling that Paul is like touching the water, and like that's the last time he gets to see his planet, which has so much water. And then you go to Arrakis, where water is so scarce and it's such a rare and valuable resource, but then it's like spice is the thing that also is over water in terms of that. And I thought visually the way that Denis tied that together, I thought that was a very beautiful thing that Denis tried to translate and illustrate overall. Also, I'm sure people noticed the parallels with Paul looking off into the sunset on Caladan before they leave. Obviously, it's gonna remind a lot of people of Luke from Star Wars looking out at the twin sunset. Obviously, it's like one of the most iconic scenes in Star Wars history. Ironic as hell, because Dune influenced a lot of what Star Wars actually is. So I feel like this was kind of Denis kind of throwing an olive branch back to Star Wars and using Star Wars to influence one of the shots in his film. And I just thought that was a very cool parallel to see. Also, I'm sure you guys wondered what was up with the little desert mouse that, you know, was in the movie a couple of times. Once was when Paul was watching the film book, and then he saw the little desert mouse among the plants, and that was right before the hunter-seeker scene. In the desert, when Paul and his mom are about to get rescued by Duncan, you see another shot of the desert mouse jumping around, and I'm sure some people were like, this is random, why the hell is there a desert mouse here? Well, spoiler alert, the desert mouse is actually going to be a very important part of Paul's identity going forward into part 2, because Paul eventually, when he joins the Fremen, he is given a Fremen name, and that name is Muad'Dib. Muad'Dib is the name that Paul becomes most closely associated with, especially among the Fremen, and Muad'Dib is the name of the desert mouse that you saw jumping around in this movie. That is actually a really cool nod to Muad'Dib and what that means from the books. So obviously we're gonna see more of that in part 2, and you'll understand more of what I mean when we see that, but I thought visually that was a very nice touch. Remember that scene where Paul is outside and he's talking to one of the Fremen guys who is watering the deep palms, and the guy is basically comparing the deep palms to men and talking about how much water is shared between the two of them. He basically says something like one deep palm is equivalent to like 5 men's worth of water, and so there are 20 deep palms, and that's 100 lives. I thought this was a great way to illuminate water as a resource on Arrakis and how the Fremen judge water, how they look at water. Also, it's juxtaposed visually later with the Sardaukar and the Harkonnens attacking, and you see the deep palms on fire, which is kind of an allusion to mankind and humanity and their ability to not preserve life, but burn it and destroy it in order for something greater, or something they believe is greater. Subtle ways that they're able to keep the themes of the book intact. That made me very happy watching this movie. I'm glad that they didn't show the Emperor. The Emperor's presence looms large over this film. Obviously, his actions and his behind-the-scenes political maneuvering and scheming with the Baron influenced the plot of this movie heavily. But the Emperor himself is not actually shown. I think this is great because it builds anticipation for part 2, where we can speculate about the casting. And I also just don't think the Emperor should have been shown in this part anyways. I think it would have been tempting to do it, especially if you don't know if you're getting a part 2. Also, Liet Kynes, the Imperial ecologist in the movie, played by Sharon Duncan. I can't remember her name. She was great in the movie though. The only piece of backstory that you find out about Leah Kynes, Paul basically tells her own story. He's like, oh, well, I know that you fell in love with a Fremen warrior and I know that he died in battle or whatever. That smirk that she gives when he asks, what are you to the Fremen? I mean, those are tiny little moments that I think will be built upon in part 2, but I'm glad they didn't reveal the connection between Leah Kynes and Also, spoilers, they did not reveal a specific thing about Paul and Lady Jessica's heritage that I thought they might reveal, but they decided not to for this movie. I want you guys to kind of find out about it on your own. There is a line in the movie that does reference this, and the Baron is the one who says it. That's all I'm gonna say. If you don't know what line I'm talking about, just go through the movie, and then if you have a question about one of his lines, it's probably that one. Because this was such a holy shit moment for me in the book when I read it, but there is something to Paul and Jessica's heritage that the movie does not tell you, that the movie does not outright show you. And it's a huge thing, like it's a huge spoiler, so I'm not gonna talk about that. There are nitpicks that I have. While I predicted that the story would end with the fight between Paul and Jamis as far as Paul's introduction into the Fremen world, I thought that's a good place to end the movie. I actually think a better place to end it would have been during the Water of Life change scene from the books. I think that would have been perfect because there's like a 2.5 year time jump after that where we get deeper into the story, and I don't know, I was a little bit disappointed that we ended it where we ended it, even though it is kind of a perfect place to end it. There's a scene in the books where House Atreides gets to Arrakis, and then there's kind of like a welcoming party for them at their palace, and they get to kind of just invite a bunch of people and talk about, you know, the state of Arrakis, and there's a whole bunch of politics and things flying around that table. You get even more insight into Kynes and his, or I guess her, motivation. It's just a great all-around scene that showcases a lot of hidden agendas around the table and really does continue to show that the walls are closing in on House Atreides as they venture onto this new adventure on Arrakis. Wish we had had the banquet scene. The banquet scene would have just fleshed everything out even more. It would have added even more political intrigue to the movie, and it would have fleshed out Leah Kynes' motivation even more. You do get some subtle references and hints at Leah Kynes and what she wants and what's motivating her as far as the plot for Arrakis. But I just feel like the banquet scene would have added all of that plus more. And I don't know, if you just take an extra 5-10 minutes and you just add that scene in, you don't even have to show the whole scene. Just show specific parts of the scene that would have really enriched the characters and the story even more. In the movie, you guys know that Dr. Yue betrays House Atreides, and he basically sets up the Duke Leto to die, but also sets him up to kill the Baron on his way out if he chooses his moment correctly, as you heard him say in the movie. We hear him mention his wife and how he wants the Harkonnens to give him back his wife or whatever, how they're taking her apart like a doll. So in the books, the traitor subplot is actually a much bigger subplot than it is in the movie. In the movie, it's very much trimmed down and cut for time, and really the only time that you find out who the traitor is when Dr. Yue walks right up to Leto after like shooting that trank through his shield or whatever. But in the book, the subplot is much bigger, and there are aspects of it that I think added a lot more intrigue and unrest to House Atreides, and I think it would have been cool to add some of that into the movie. There's a lot of suspicion and finger pointing going on because there's a lot of speculation about who this traitor is. Great suspicion that is cast on Lady Jessica. Thurfer Hawat basically has a great scene with her where she uses the voice on him and he confronts her about his suspicions. Stuff like that I get disappointed and irritated at that they're not in the movie. I think it definitely would have added something to the film. I get why it was cut down, why it was reduced, but I don't know, stuff like that, it's a little bit bittersweet for me. Because Thurfer doesn't really have a huge role in the movie. He disappears at a certain point in the movie and we only see him use his Mentat ability once. Now that I bring that up, Mentats are not really talked about a lot in the movie at all. They cover a lot of the other basics of the lore, but Mentats, which are basically human computers for the uninitiated, are human beings who have been trained in computer awareness. So basically human beings that have been trained to think and act like computers, because actual computers and artificial intelligence or machines that have been made in the likeness of humanity have been banned throughout the known universe. It's a little bit disappointing that we didn't get more into the Mentats and their techniques and why they're so important. Also, they completely skipped over the fact that Paul is a Mentat and has had some of that training in the book. I get it, you don't want to bog down your audience with so much backstory that it makes them lose interest in stuff. This is just the book nerd in me, like, bitching about some things that I wish we would have seen. I don't think it necessarily affects the movie's quality, but I do think if some of this stuff had been added, it would have made the movie even better. As far as my favorite scenes in the movie, obviously, I mean, I could go with the Gom Jabbar scene from the beginning of the film with the Reverend Mother of the Bene Gesserit. I love the fact that we heard the litany of fear repeated out loud. In the books, I think it's only an internal thing that is not said out loud, but I love the fact that Jessica is kind of speaking out loud for fear of her son. I love that moment. I love that entire scene. Bittersweet as it is, I love the scene with Duke Leto and his death where he says, "Here I am, here I remain," and then he tries to breathe out and kill the Baron and everybody else in the room. I thought that was a great moment. Heartbreaking and tragic, but definitely, you know, that was one of my favorite scenes. The scene that also is going on simultaneously while that scene is happening is where Paul is in the tent and then the spice leads to more prescient awareness, and then he begins to see these horrible visions of what is going to happen in the future. He references a holy war being fought in his name, everyone screaming his name. This is a great scene and really does illustrate some of the terror of what Paul sees and feels in the book as far as what his future is going to be. I think it would have done even more to hammer home the point that Paul is not necessarily the hero of this story. He's the protagonist, he is not the hero, and he doesn't become the hero of this story. So even though it sets up to be a hero's journey, that's not what this is, because if you look at where it leads, Paul becomes a part of the bigger problem that the movie and the book are trying to allude to, which is imperialism, colonialism, the idea of a savior and stuff like that, and why that's a bad thing. While that's a great scene with amazing music and incredible visuals, and I love the way that it was translated from the book to the screen, I thought the fallout from that scene should have been a little bit heavier, and we should have seen more of that. I could go to the spice harvest scene is one of my all-time favorite scenes. I could go to the scene where they're running away from Shai Hulud, the sandworm, at the end of the film. I'm a little bittersweet that we didn't get to hear Gurney and his balisette. Maybe they're saving that for part 2. By the way, spoilers, but you didn't see what happened to Gurney Halleck. You didn't see what happened to Thurfer Hawat, so you should just assume that, yeah, since you didn't see what's gonna happen to them, you're gonna see more of them in part 2. So much more that I'm not mentioning right now, but I'm not gonna try to overload you guys, and I don't want the video to be eons long, so I'm gonna leave it here. There's a lot more to talk about in regards to the world of Dune, and this is not the last video I'm gonna be making talking about Dune, obviously. Did you love it? What were some of your favorite moments, favorite scenes? What are you most looking forward to in part 2? Do you have any casting ideas for the Emperor or for Princess Arulin or for Fade Ryutha? Let me know in the comment section down below. Please like and subscribe to the Superfan Show, and if you like what you see, tell me how you're feeling.